2009 was the year that Lady Gaga was climbing the charts. The economy was absolutely tanking. And Bravo decided that what America really needed was a family in Franklin Lakes showing us how they were living, leopard print included. All right, Sprinkles, buckle up because today we're going all the way back to May 12th, 2009, and we're going to recap the first premiere episode, season one, episode one, Blood is Thicker Than Water of the Real Housewives of New Jersey. Let's set the stage real quick. So 2009 was the golden age of chaos reality TV. Like, John and Kate plus eight were blowing up. I'm pretty sure their divorce was happening at the time, but I remember that show had a lot of drama. The Hills were starting to wind down. The Kardashians, they were just starting their empires build up. The Housewives itself were still pretty new. Orange County had just been around for a few years, and Atlanta was hitting our screens, and then Bravo was like, we need another franchise here because this is a moneymaker and people like me, are eating it up. Along came New Jersey with a bit of a twist. They weren't just focused on women in a zip code. Instead, they were focused on blood loyalty above all else and really focused on the family dynamics of these housewives, not just the lavish lifestyles that they live. We're talking sisters, in-laws, blood thicker than thieves kind of dialogue. And that gave us something new that Bravo hadn't really done before. Politically, in 2009, Barack Obama had just been sworn in a few months earlier. Do you remember the Hope and Change posters? Like, I'm Canadian, and even we were really impressed and like blown away. And we were so optimistic for all of our friends in America. We couldn't believe that you finally got a Black president that was going to totally turn things around. We're not a political channel though, so we're not going to get into that. But at the same time, the world was still reeling from the 2008 financial collapse. People's houses were being repossessed or foreclosed on by the bank. Millions of Americans and Canadians were out of work. And then here comes Teresa Giudice onto our screens, bragging about how she only pays cash because the economy is so bad. Like, the irony, because we all know what happened to Teresa later in life, but also just like the out of touch nature of that statement was so shocking to me. And then thinking about fashion in 2009, because this was one thing I could not keep my eyes off of when I was rewatching this. Like, choices were made. Juicy Couture, thank God, was on its last legs. I wish it had stayed in the past. Ed Hardy was like clinging on for dear life, and rhinestone bedazzled giant oversized necklaces were adorning all of our chests. There were Tory Burch, like awful t-shirt dresses in this episode. I'm looking at you, Caroline. And then there were like bumpets and big hair. There were spray tans that could almost glow in the dark. If you looked like a bedazzled wine mom who just left the mall kiosk, congratulations, you were totally on trend. I remember in 2009, I would have been like going out in my university days, and we basically put on like our best business casual outfits and went out and partied. Like, I'm talking jeans and a cute top because that was the outfit. And the jeans would be whatever, but then the cute top was like inevitably some sort of camisole with like a blazer and then like a statement necklace and a really ridiculous pair of stacked platforms. I don't know where we thought we were going dressed like this, but it was it was insane. It was an insane time for fashion. And so like Jersey really embodied this over the top, dramatic, bedazzled, crazy way of living and expressing yourself. We're going to talk more in depth about it, but the scene where they go furniture shopping, like the gaudiness of it all, it is so ridiculous. When we think about what was happening in the pop culture sort of milieu of the time, we had Lady Gaga dominating the charts with Poker Face. Beyonce had us dancing the single ladies dance pretty much everywhere we went. And the Black Eyed Peas had us all going boom, boom, bow. I'm sorry you had to see that. At the movies, we were watching things like Star Trek, Angels and Demons, X-Men Origins, Wolverine. Blockbusters and glitter pop ruled the world in the day. And remember, this was pre-Instagram. Remember, May 2009 was pre-Instagram. It did not come out until fall of 2010, which makes me feel old, but Facebook was where all of the Housewives drama lived. If you wanted gossip, you either had to go on Facebook and find a fan page, or you had to go on PerezHilton.com, which We will not be addressing him because I think he's probably grown as a human and I don't want to open myself up to litigation. Or you had to go look at TMZ, which I don't think has actually changed very much since 2009. They've always been who they are. Danielle Staub was trying to find men to date on a website called wealthymen.com. Like, it was a different time. And the internet was still not that trusting, which we're also going to talk about a little bit later when we talk about Danielle's date. Housewives themselves also reflected what we were talking about more broadly in society. Were women supposed to be strong, independent people like Dina, or were they supposed to be family obsessed? Moms that were beholden to their kids, like Caroline? Were they supposed to be glamorous wives like Teresa or, overtly sexual people like Danielle Staub? Every cast member embodied a type of woman that we were talking about in 2009 and debating the validity of their choices and their existence. So, yeah, some things never change. So, that's the world that we're stepping back into today with this recap of Real Housewives of New Jersey, Season 1, Episode 1. It was a country in recession, a culture steeped in chaos, and obsessed with reality TV, a fashion era that we probably should have left in the past, and a Bravo franchise that was ready to crown their first true villain. Let's get into episode 1, Thicker Than Water. Okay, one of the craziest things to me about this is the opening sequence. I was like, are we watching Speed like circa, what was that, 1992? Every shot was like a Mercedes whipping down the Garden State Parkway, like windows down, blowing in their big Jersey hair. And it was just so like fast cuts and kind of crazy and didn't really allude to drama in the way that the newer seasons tend to. It really was just like, here are some rich women. Check them out. And then we cut to this shopping scene. We're seeing big shopping bags, we're seeing glamorous hallways, and then we cut to Caroline and Dina and Teresa inside La Perla, which is a very expensive and fancy lingerie store, and they're trying on different outfits together. Now, I don't know about you, but I usually don't go lingerie shopping with like family members, but maybe it's different in Jersey. And what I found really funny about this scene was the fact that Teresa was saying how people assume that she's this fake Jersey girl. And she's like, I'm not fake. And then immediately they cut to her talking about getting a breast augmentation surgery. And I'm like, chef's kiss because the editors and the producers for Bravo, they work so hard. They work so hard for us to give us the most unhinged, ridiculous, and thoughtful edits like that. And what's interesting is like the one thing that kind of kept Teresa from committing, other than probably the fact that they didn't have any money, was that Joe was more of like a behind guy. And so she's like, I don't think I need to get them done. Now, it's 2025. We all know what Teresa looks like now, but it's just interesting that that was our first perception of her. She's running errands. She's talking about her kids and how they have to look great all the time and how much she loves them and lives for them. She goes over to, the office that Joe works out of, which again, like I'm not from New Jersey. I don't know a lot about it. And so maybe this is the standard way, but it was like a rundown house on like an industrial street, giving kind of like Roncesvalles in Toronto vibes. Like it's an old house on a store as a storefront on a street, on a busy street with like no aesthetic, no bushes, no nice, and like this weird generic sign. And then it's just like an open, horrible, fluorescent lit office with Joe sitting there, and then Teresa making like weird innuendos, and Joe making jokes about like locking up the checkbooks because all she knows how to do is spend money. And I'm just like, the foreshadowing is crazy with this because we all know what happens and we're going to get there eventually. But yeah, Joe's construction business. I mean, it looked like a bit of a front from the jump, so who knows? I'm not a lawyer. And then there's a little bit of like foreshadowing too around her talking about just being the one to spend the money. So I found that to be kind of interesting. And then we get the house tour. Teresa bragging about the house that they've been building for 3 years, which, they don't have that house anymore. And, cutting to scenes of like, clearly Joe's friends like driving equipment around the property and like moving pallets. And I'm like, that's not constructing a house, but okay. And then we see her go shopping with Jacqueline Laurita. And, Jacqueline saying how much she loves going shopping with Teresa because there's no limits with her. She can just buy whatever she wants. She's channeling French chateau for her home, and they're looking at like the most god awful, disgusting, oversized, like wood furniture that I've ever seen in my life. Like, those couches that have like wood arms, but then like overstuffed, like textural, weird brocade kind of fabric, that energy, which I mean, maybe it's fitting because we know Teresa was a little bit like a Marie Antoinette and had to pay the price for her crimes. Maybe there's some foreshadowing in that too. But what's wild is like the guy in the furniture store is showing these like $1,000 dining room chairs, and they're giving like the brick. They're giving Leon's. They're giving, oh my God, who was that guy from Toronto? Nobody. He used to be the mayor. I'll have to think about it and put it in when I edit. I can't remember. It was just like cheap, gaudy, weird furniture. And like $1,000, that is now worth, so 1,000 US dollars in 2009 is now worth $1,510.12 in 2025. For one ugly Leon's looking chair. Okay. So monstrosity of a shopping journey and just like an overall gold mine of like absolute tone deaf behavior from Teresa. So let's get into Dina's storyline. She's the second person that we're introduced to in the show, and we're taught that she is the youngest of 11 siblings. Carolyn is one of her older siblings. It sounds like Carolyn might be the oldest. I'm not actually sure. And that she went through a recent divorce. And then she talks about how her job is to be an interior designer, and then they cut to scenes of her home, and like they are awful. It's that same like gaudy, disgusting, oversized furniture that just fills the space with like misery and oppression and like not joy. And it's horrible, and I hate everything about it. And I wonder actually if she's still an interior designer today. But anyway, she's also now moving into an event planning role, and it sounds like she probably got that gig directly from Caroline. She is the owner of the Brownstone with her husband, and it sounds like maybe Dina's doing a little bit of work there, which we love to see support in a family when you're going through a hard time. So that's one thing that, maybe there's the family drama in the show and people can, have some weird boundaries and feelings about that. But at the end of the day, these families really do care about each other. She talks about how Caroline let her live in a spare room with her daughter when she was first getting divorced. Now, it also brings up some really interesting like class tensions here. Dina talks about how when she was single, like nobody in Franklin Lakes would look at her. They wouldn't invite her to things. They kind of saw her as an outsider and they weren't really interested in making friends with her until until she started dating her now husband. Well, actually, I guess her then husband, because I'm pretty sure they're not together anymore. But then when she started driving his Mercedes around, all of a sudden the women in Franklin Lakes were very interested in getting to know her. So that kind of is alluding a little bit around like the power. It's alluding to like how you can become an insider in some of these closed communities. Like when they think that you belong there, they're going to invite you in. But if they can look at you and think that you're not from there, then you're going to be excluded. So we also are introduced to Dina's daughter, Lexi, and they seem to have an interesting relationship. She goes to Dina and Lexi go play tennis together. They have a bit of like a joking relationship, but Lexi also makes these really offhand comments about how she doesn't want an ugly fat mom because she wants to be able to share her clothes and, have her be a friend. And I'm like, that's not what a mom is. Anyway, Okay, so then we're next introduced to Caroline Manzo, and she is obviously the mama bear and one of the main sort of cast and characters on the show. And our first introduction to her is that her kids always come first. We see her, helping her kids. We see her showing up at the brownstone, doing some work there. And that becomes a big part of the identity because it's this family run business. The kids all work there, and that's sort of their other baby. And I think it also allows Caroline to do what she does best and how she identifies, which is this caregiver, this person that solves problems, this person that feeds others, takes care of them, creates great parties. There's a scene where she talks about how she gets unlimited food and unlimited servers, and that's why she has the brownstone, so she can throw these big parties. And I think it's really an extension of her identity in a lot of ways. Her son's antics, though, oh my God. So Albie, he's like the golden child. He's handsome, but, we know in 2025, like he hasn't really panned out to be like the family success that they really positioned him as in those earlier seasons. And Christopher is kind of seen as like the silly, less than brother. He's not quite as handsome. He's not quite as smart. And his number one dream is to have a strip club car wash. Now, he does say in the show that he doesn't want people to know that he owns both. But he also says that the girls, when they're not working at the club, will be working at the car wash. And when Albie asks him, when are they supposed to sleep? Because that's kind of like a 24-hour a day schedule. Christopher says that they can sleep on Sundays. So, not a great leader. And what's interesting is that Caroline actually is supportive of the strip club idea. She says, there's lots of high-end strip clubs in our neighborhood or in our area, rather. And, let's run a respectable strip club. But I can only imagine if her daughter came up to her and said she wants to do that, what would her reaction be? What would her reaction be if Al said, I'm selling the brownstone and I'm opening strip clubs? Just curious, What I also love about Christopher is like he doesn't want the strip club because of access to girls or anything kind of like that. The number one reason that he says he wants it is because it's recession proof. And given the context of when the show was happening, that's actually so funny because of course, a young entrepreneur would be thinking about what is the best business that I could make right now that is going to be successful. So, the next character that we get introduced to in this series is Jacqueline Laurita. So, she talks about how she's born in Vegas. She is not a Jersey girl, but just by looking at her, you could never know. She's totally adopted the Jersey style. And she talks about the culture shock that she experiences in Franklin Lakes, which, like, I get that every state in America is pretty different. To call it culture shock, to move from Las Vegas to New Jersey and call it culture shock, I just find really funny. Like, culture shock would be going from Las Vegas to like Nepal and living there for a year. Like, it's still the same country. You speak the same language, you listen to the same music and watch the same movies. You have more in common than you don't. But what's also funny about Jacqueline is that she says she thought that New Jersey was the armpit of the world. And the only reason that she moved there was for her husband, Chris Laurita, who, again, I don't know a ton about him. I haven't done a lot of like external research on Chris, but in the intro, she talks about how he owns a successful clothing company. I actually think he's like in the cannabis industry or alcohol industry now, but I'm gonna maybe do a little research on that and put something up here. We also very briefly get introduced to her daughter, Ashley, who she says comes from a previous marriage, and that she also has her son with Chris, CJ. Now, in 2025, we know that CJ has been diagnosed with autism and is a pretty high needs kid. And, we really didn't have the language in the early 2000s to talk about these kinds of things. We still had people thinking that autism can be caused by vaccines or like things that literally don't cause it. And I feel a lot of sympathy for Jacqueline because it's got to be difficult raising a daughter like Ashley, which I was the Ashley in my household, so I get it. But then also having a child with challenges that genuinely needs your love and attention and support, which is CJ. So we don't actually see a lot of interaction with Ashley in this first episode, but I know the drama that goes on because this is a rewatch recap. So I'm really excited to get into those episodes where Ashley just starts to go off the deep end. But for now, in the first episode, a little bit of a softer intro to her. Jacqueline also seems to view herself a bit as a mediator, and she talks a lot about seeing the good in everyone. And she's very clearly torn between her friendship with Danielle and her friendships and relationships with her family members, her sisters-in-law, Caroline and Dina. Now, there's this big scene at the end where they all go to the chateau, which is Franklin Lake's local beauty salon, and they go get their bumpets put in and their glam for the night out at Cipriani's. And Danielle's sitting there on a bench outside while everyone else is inside getting their hair and their nails done. So obviously, producers had to have a hand in that because Danielle's not just showing up at the chateau for a filming if she doesn't have to be there. So probably the producer said, "Hey, like we're gonna want you to come here and like confront Jacqueline and Dina about this." So, Jacqueline is really surprised to see Danielle there and says, she politely tries to say like, "Hey, like it wasn't up to me to invite people and like I would have if I could, but it's not my event. I'm an invitee too, and I can't, guarantee that you can come. Like you weren't invited to this." And Danielle keeps going on almost in this like narcissistic, abusive way of like, well, it doesn't upset me that I wasn't included. I just need to know why. Well, Danielle, it obviously does upset you because you're here confronting the person that has nothing to do with it. And I think the reason that she was sort of confronting Jacqueline about it rather than going directly to Dina is that Dina does not take her crap. She's not going to put up with it, and Danielle knows that Jacqueline is a little bit of a weaker link, that she does want to be the mediator and that she does see the best in everyone. So she's going to try to like squeeze her way in through that. And we get this setup, this dynamic setup of being torn between like family loyalty and friendship loyalty, which I mean, that is the Real Housewives of New Jersey in a nutshell, thinking about later seasons when we get into more of the Giudice Gorga drama. One thing also that was really interesting to me about Danielle's introduction was that it was like over sexualized editing. We see her walking around in a string bikini and feeling her body in her swimming pool at home and talking about how she takes care of herself. That she was the only person with a black Amex card. She was engaged 19 times. That she's got single mom glam. And what really struck me is that we also were introduced to Teresa in a bra and underwear. She wasn't wearing much more than what Danielle was, but that was framed as like a fun, sassy girlfriend's afternoon shopping for the benefit of your husband, whereas Danielle was framed more as like Scarlet Letter woman. Look at this easy woman, and almost done in like a negative light, whereas Teresa was shown really similarly, but in a different light. So it's almost like the producers want to set us up to feel some type of way about Danielle, to see her as competitive, to see her as like a dangerous woman of sorts. And she does, Danielle's not a perfect woman. She was engaged 19 times. And she has a little bit of an inappropriate relationship with her daughters. She will lean on them for advice, asking them things that a mom really shouldn't be asking their kids, and just treating them in a way that's not really going to set them up for success and just demonstrates her lack of emotional maturity at this stage in 2009. Other part of the setup here comes from her date. So, the sort of last bit of the episode is focused around Danielle's date, and she's going to meet a guy that she met on this wealthymen.com website, and his pseudonym online was Gucci Model. And they only knew each other because they would have phone relations, let's say. So she knew this guy for 2 years. They've been having phone relations for 2 years, and they were finally going to go on a date. So she gets all dolled up. Teresa and Jacqueline come over. They give her a hand to get ready, and they're kind of judging her for it. Like, Jacqueline doesn't think it's very safe. Teresa's saying, like, you're gonna meet some guy you've already had phone relations with for 2 years, and he's already seen photos of you, naked photos of you, and you're gonna go meet this guy. Like, why would you even do that? And think that she's crossing a line by meeting somebody in real life that she had met online. And I mean, it's really funny now because that's such a common way that we meet people. Like I met my fiance on the internet on a dating app, and we've been together for 7 years. We're gonna elope. Like that is a very modern love story. But in 2009, it still was a little bit on the outs. It was still seen as like, what's wrong with you that you have to do internet dating? You can't just meet somebody in real life. So they're really the production team, the editing team is working overtime here to really set up Danielle as someone who is outside of this group. She's seen as a bit of a villainous woman, a little bit of maybe like an easy woman. And even though, Dina also has weird relationship with her daughter, Caroline has a really weird relationship with her two sons, Albie and Christopher. Um, we see Teresa in skimpy lingerie. We're told and we're shown to look at Danielle in a different way, which I think is really interesting. So we're really setting her up to be the villain here right from the get-go. I feel bad. I feel bad that she got stood up on this date and she did something that probably all women have done at some point or another. The guy stands her up. It's okay. This is the part that actually gets me though. They were supposed to meet at 7:30 p.m. and it is 9 p.m. And she's like, "Do you think he's gonna show?" to the other ladies sitting at the bar. Why are you still there an hour and a half later? Okay, like if I was going on a date with someone and I put makeup on, a cute outfit on, I got my body to the date location, like I did all the things, and 15 minutes have gone by and I have not heard from you, like you will never see or hear from me ever again. I'm not waiting. Danielle, obviously, probably shame is a big feeling for her. That seems to be a bit of a trigger, understandably. And so she phones this guy, she phones Gucci model, and she says, like, forget it. Like, you probably came in here and saw how hot I am, and you could never be with someone like me, so you left. You can't. Like, goodbye, see you never, and like hangs up on him. And I'm like, girl, like, you're telling on yourself. You're telling that you're telling on yourself that you sat here for an hour and a half waiting for this guy to show up. Like, we don't need to give men that kind of power. We don't need them to think that they're that important. So I really wish Danielle hadn't done that, but I know how in the moment doing something like that can feel really good. Overall, season one, episode one of The Real Housewives of New Jersey, is it the best opening episode of a Real Housewives franchise? No. Is it historic? Also, no. What it is, though, what it is that it's entertaining. And what, 16 years, 16 and a half years after the show premiered, we're still talking about it. I'm rewatching it. It is a franchise that lives on, and people have a lot of feelings about. There are entire podcasts dedicated to the show. There are whole Instagram channels. There are whole communities of people that are still obsessed with the old episodes. And so it's also really interesting to watch it back and, think about the time that was happening in, what was going on in the world. And it's also interesting knowing what we do about the cast members and their lives, looking at those OG days of them and how did they talk and carry themselves and act. So, season one, I have honestly pretty hazy memories of what we're going to get into. I obviously don't forget the final episode because that is burned into all of our brains and it's going to be an exciting one to talk about. But it's just nice to kind of go back and watch something where at the time, life was so optimistic and so many good things were happening, and to just sort of relive the simpler days of 2009. So if you've made it all the way to the end, I just want to say thank you so much. Please make sure that you like and subscribe and turn the bell on so that you don't miss an episode. I'm going to be rewatching all of season one of Real Housewives of New Jersey and uploading hopefully once a week, if not sooner. If there are episodes or seasons that you want me to cover, please leave a comment below and tell me about it. And I can't wait to see you in the next one where we're going to be talking about season one, episode 2 of The Real Housewives of New Jersey. Until next time, I'll see you later, Sprinkles.